But first, I have it on good authority that on some days, the best thing on the TV machine is just the raw feed from Congress. And today was one of those days. Today we met a whistleblower with the goods on a suspected criminal who was ignored by the federal government for 9 years. Harry Markopolos was begging and pleading to help the SEC take down Bernie Madoff, the alleged $50 billion bilking Ponzi scheme operator. And Mr. Markopolos, despite the evidence he handed over, was ignored by the SEC. Now, I'm not usually an SEC hearings sort of person, but this stuff today, this was good.
I gift wrapped and delivered the largest Ponzi scheme in history to them, and somehow they couldn't be bothered to conduct a thorough and proper investigation because they were too busy on matters of higher priority. If a $50 billion Ponzi scheme doesn't make the SEC's priority list, then I want to know who sets their priorities. If you flew the entire SEC staff to Boston, sat them in Fenway Park for an afternoon, that they would not be able to find first base.
I told you this was good. Now, how bad did Harry Markopolos want to stop Mr. Madoff? Check this out.
I offered to go undercover for the SEC, under their command and control, and have no one know where I was, except my wife, and I would have no contact with my family during this time. I would have assumed a disguise, as I was trained to in the Army, and gone undercover and led that team to a successful result very quickly. I don't know what more I could do to put it on the line and bring this man to justice than I attempted to do in my October 2001 submission.
On one level, this is the story of a brave whistleblower willing to risk life and limb to bring a criminal to justice, as in Viggo Mortensen should totally play him in the movie. On another level, this is a government gone bad story. This is a consequences of deregulating everything story. In the financial industry, radical deregulation took the bumpers off the bumper cars. It turned Wall Street into a demolition derby. When it all started to collapse in September, we were reminded that the bumpers are there for a reason. Finance is a high-risk, high-reward, full-contact industry. But because its collapse has the potential to collapse the global economy, government is supposed to contain the field of play, put a fence around the bull ring, put bumpers on the bumper cars. So the consequences of private sector financial catastrophe, if it happens, don't drag the country and the world down with it. Without regulation, what do we get? Well, we get 3 million people ruined by Bernie Madoff, 300 million people sweating the future in America like it's 1931. Deregulation and laissez-faire market can do no wrong, tear down all the rules time. It's up. Time is up. It was a failure. We tried it. It didn't work. Now it's time to return to sanity. The opening gambit in the inevitable new era of sane regulation was the executive pay issue. Low-hanging fruit. The president today saying that in America, we don't disparage wealth. We do not begrudge anyone their success. But
what gets people upset, and rightfully so, are executives being rewarded for failure, especially when those rewards are subsidized by U.S. taxpayers, many of whom are having a tough time themselves. Top executives at firms receiving extraordinary help from U.S. taxpayers will have their compensation capped at $500,000.
What you are experiencing right now is populist satisfaction. That money we all donated to these businesses isn't being siphoned off into the individual, private, undoubtedly offshore bank accounts of individual executives who failed at running those businesses, who came hat in hand to the government for public money, whose companies would not exist had we, the American people, not said, sure, here's your handout. That feeling is satisfaction. The thing is, though, that executive pay caps are mainly a symbolic move. Yes, it's low-hanging political fruit, but if the executive audacious ingratitude problem were made 100% better today, we would still have an economy in free fall. And the geniuses who gave us deregulation, all this discredited, market knows best, abolish all the rules thinking, are now the biggest barrier to what it will take to stop the free fall of the economy. They are still around, and they are still pushing their discredited ideas that got us in this mess in the first place.
We want a solution. We understand and appreciate that tax policy is the way that you get to a solution.
We're going to have properly targeted tax credits that really help small businesses.
The Republicans have better ideas about how to promote more economic growth with business tax relief.
Yes, the deregulation and tax cut crowd, the crowd that brought us huge deficits and near economic collapse, they're now proposing, surprise, more tax cuts as the solution to this current crisis. Fortunately, that crowd lost. They lost badly in the great economic ideas referendum known as the 2008 election. And fortunately, the president found his voice on that point today.
In the past few days, I've heard criticisms of this plan that frankly echo the very same failed theories that helped lead us into this crisis in the first place. The notion that tax cuts alone will solve all our problems. I reject these theories, and, by the way, so did the American people when they went to the polls in November and voted resoundingly for change.
Joining us now is Nobel Prize-winning economist and New York Times columnist Paul Krugman. He's the author of the new book, The Return of Depression Economics and the Crisis of 2008. Mr. Krugman, it's a pleasure to have you back on the show. Thanks for joining us.
Good to be on again.
We know that re-regulating Wall Street is coming, but the stimulus bill comes first in Washington. What is your response to the Republicans' insistence on tax cuts being the bulk of the stimulus?
Well, yeah, I mean, we sort of tried that for the last 8 years, right? And it didn't work so well. And, you know, there's very good economic theory that says that tax cuts are a very inferior form of doing this. The problem is there's not enough spending in our economy. There's not enough demand to keep people employed. Give people tax cuts, especially give relatively affluent people tax cuts, they are probably going to hang on to most of the money, not spend it. It doesn't do very much. You run up a lot of federal debt, but you don't end up doing very much stimulating. And that's why spending, you know, there are various forms that spending can take, but actually getting the money out there, laying it out, aside from the fact that we need the stuff the government can give to us here, it's also a better way to get the economy moving.
I sort of feel like you and other prominent economists in the country deserve some sort of public interest credit of your own for having to explain that point over and over and over again.
I sometimes think we've returned to the dark ages here. We've forgotten all the stuff that our grandfathers learned, and it sort of disappeared from our memory. And somewhere hidden in the monasteries are the manuscripts with all of this ancient knowledge.
Or hidden in Econ 101 textbooks in the first chapter.
Yeah.
I mean, it's basic economic literacy. Maybe because we don't have basic economic literacy, the pro-tax cuts arguments are working. I mean, the Republicans are almost dominating the debate when you look at the popular discussion about the stimulus plan, and we're starting to see their position reflected even in public opinion polls.
Yeah, I think this is partly bad media coverage. It's partly that, you know, they have a simple point to hammer. And I have to say, until today, Obama and team were a little bit they were so busy trying to change the tone in Washington that they weren't, you know, focused on the main thing, which is to get this economy moving.
The Madoff whistleblower today, Mr. Markopolos, he said today that the SEC, the Securities and Exchange Commission, essentially would lose in a math contest with Mr. Ed. They described them as completely feckless. Is regulation in the financial industry really that lame?
It's pretty bad. You know, it's not. If you spend 30 years saying that government is always the problem, never the solution, if you spend 30 years castigating government bureaucrats, you know, many of whom are actually, you know, we need bureaucrats, and if you underfund these agencies, if you make government a place where smart people don't go because, hey, it's got bad rep, and furthermore, it pays so much less than being on Wall Street, being a malefactor of great wealth, then you have to expect that the whole apparatus is not going to work. So in the case of the SEC, they had the authority. The rules were there, but we had degraded, you know, we'd FEMA-fied it. We degraded the agency so much that it couldn't do its job.
When did that degrading start?
Oh, it really goes back to Ronald Reagan. I mean, you really want to, this began in 1981, and it's taken place over the years. And while there was some improvement during the Clinton years, Clinton didn't have Congress on his side, wasn't able to make the kind of break that in that trend. So we've really had, it's almost 30 years now of degrading these things, and eventually these are the consequences.
If the stimulus bill gets passed, and if the president keeps up the line that he got great applause for today, if the stimulus happens, he kills the tax cut folly that could screw up that plan, what should be next on the agenda, in your opinion?
Well, financial rescue, that's the other thing. You know, we do, we're busy constraining the paychecks to these executives, but we actually, meanwhile, have a failing banking system. And, you know, the new administration has not been very good at coming out with a plan that makes sense to anybody. and they need to do that. So, I mean, the immediate thing is we have to stop this free fall in the financial system and the economy. The stimulus bill takes care to some extent. I don't think it's big enough, but it takes care of the demand side, but we need to work on the financial side. And we also then have to do re-regulation of the financial markets, which we need to do while the crisis is still fresh in our minds. We don't wait until everything's fine before we're trying to fix it, because at that point the industry lobbyists will make sure that nothing happens.
So big stimulus, clearly explained, well thought out financial system retrenching and rescue, and then getting regulation back on track. That's our agenda.
And next month some other stuff.
Yeah, exactly.
It's a huge agenda, but it has to be done.
And then,
the world is depending on it.
Flying cars, and then we'll get to work on everything else.
Right.
Paul Krugman, Nobel Prize winning economist, New York Times columnist. It's always such a pleasure to have you on the show. Thank you, Paul.